Yes, it's another Ask It Basket with Robert Pardon and me, Justin B. And this is funny. Just released one last week and recorded this one because I could not find the recording I did with Robert and Whitney from last week. And so I re-recorded with Robert, and as I was processing his recording and getting ready, I found the other recording that he and I did with Whitney earlier in the same week. So we have two separate recordings, one that was released last week and one that is released today. So sit back and enjoy this second one. There may be duplicated questions, but the answers are not duplicated because God spoke differently in this meeting than the last one. Let's go. Welcome, everybody, to the Rico 12 Ask It Basket with the recovery guy, Robert Pardon. Just grateful to have him here with us. Now, a little backstory on this. He and I and Whitney, we didn't record, but we got together and we talked about and had our Ask It Basket just a couple of days ago. And I went to edit it and realized that it did not take. And so, unfortunately, Whitney isn't able to join us today, but Robert is here and excited to get into it. What we do with the Ask It Basket is we bring questions to Robert. Robert shares his, and Whitney typically, they share their experience, strength, and hope. And on these questions that, recovering addicts, live addicts, people who are living in addiction ask about 12 steps and about recovery all the time. And we're just going through those questions and sharing experience, strength, and hope. So, Robert, why don't you take just a minute, introduce yourself to the people who may not know who you are yet.
Well, thank you, Justin. Always a pleasure to be with you. And of course, as you earlier said, we certainly miss Whitney today. She had some things she had to do. And I'm so excited for Whitney because I watched her take her one-year chip last night. And as you well know, and it was so excited, I got to meet her mom and dad. And it was just quite a blessing. My friend David took 32 years. Another friend, Eric, took 1 year. And there were a number of newcomers there, which always make the room very complete. I introduced myself, Justin, as you well know, as a recovered alcoholic. And just so our listening audience, those who don't know me, I'm not recovered from the phenomenon of craving. I'm recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. And that is why I can be well. However, I can never safely consume alcoholic beverage in any level whatsoever, because not only does that open up the door to my alcoholism, the phenomenon of craving, but Justin, that leads to drugs, that leads to pornography, as I suffered from, that leads to compulsive overeating, gambling, which my first 12-step meeting, and that leads to a life of debauchery that is opened by drinking. Everything for me starts with drinking, and once I give myself permission to drink, then that phenomenon of craving takes over. And then alcohol, at some point, Justin, alcohol's not enough. I need the other elements, behavioral and substance, to come into my life to fill the gaps and to make up for what alcohol is not able to do, because there's not enough alcohol on the planet to solve that dilemma. So I'm excited about being recovered. I'm coming up on 39 years of continual sobriety, the 25th of this month, and I get to meet you and see you and your lovely wife as you travel to northern Utah. So I'm very excited about. As I said, Laura and I are moving to Florida, which is another phase of our journey, and so there's a lot going on, and a lot, as we previously discussed, there's a lot to be grateful for.
Yeah, I know this is good stuff, and I'm really excited to meet you next week too, as I travel down to Utah from here in Spokane, Washington, for a conference myself. I'll be presenting on Saturday in a conference down there on some of the principles of Step 2, and I'm really excited to be able to do that. Man, Robert, this is just so good to be able to sit down with you at least once a month and go through these questions. So let's jump into a couple of questions here that were sent over to me. And let's just start off with, why are meetings so important, Robert? I mean, yes, we hear the phrase meeting makers make it. And I see the positive and the falsehood to that also. But tell me why meetings are so important in the whole scheme of recovery.
I love this question because it the Bible says, and if you agree with it, that's fine. I'm not here to evangelize anyone in any direction. The Bible, why Eve was created, because God said, and you can take this with a grain of salt. This is just an example for those who don't believe, and that's okay. God said, it is not good for man to be alone. And within that, he created in us, in me, a degree of fellowship that was necessary. It was a necessary component for me to feel okay with me. I need to be aligned with you. And so that's why I went to bars. And, I love this question because it makes me even think about my active addiction. Justin, while I was still married in Las Vegas, I would go to bars, and I was so lonely, even though I had a wonderful wife at home and children. I was so lonely that I would go into a bar and I would try to select a bar stool that had 3 seats adjoining. And I would sit in that middle seat wherever possible, because I wasn't sure if the person was going to show up on the left or the person was going to show up on the right. But there was a person that was necessary in my life, I thought, to make it complete. Again, even though I had a wife and children at home, this is the way it was. I was so relationship and fellowship starved. So meetings, as I would be introduced to them, helped create that role of fellowship. Matter of fact, on page 17 in the big book, it talks about there's a solution, and it talks about the fellowship on a great liner, when the moment after rescue from shipwreck, when camaraderie, joyousness, and democracy, it said it would pervade or infect the vessel from the steerage, from the bottom of the ship to the top of the ship. And it said, and it talks about the fellowship. And in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, whether you buy it or not, I'm not here to convince you one way or the other. It's just the direction that Justin and I and others have taken. It said, God will show you how to create the fellowship you crave. And Justin, I've always craved fellowship. I was always lonely. I always felt like I didn't fit in somewhere with some group of people. And the fellowship of meetings attracted me so much that the roots of recovery began to take hold, even without my permission. But I loved being around people. I loved being told I was okay and that I was going to get better. And I really loved, Justin, and I know this is a long answer, I loved people telling me that they were like me. It helped me feel less alone.
Got questions about addiction, recovery, or just life in general? Let's noodle it out together. Grab your big book, a pen, a highlighter, and a notepad, and join Nikki M and me, Justin B, on Rico 12 Noodle It Out with Nikki M. Each episode, we take real-life questions, ours, yours, and those from the recovery community, and dig deep into the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous to find real, practical solutions. So, if you're ready to do the work and apply the solution, tune in to Noodle It Out with Nikki M, streaming now on your favorite podcast platform. Yeah, thank you, Robert. And I want to dive into this just a little bit more here, Robert, because you and I, the fellowship we crave and have developed between you and I and our little world with Whitney and others that you've brought into my life, and maybe I've brought into your life, but I think it's mostly you bringing into my life. But, that has always been a virtual thing. We have not met each other in a face-to-face meeting yet. And I go to the forward to the 4th edition of the big book, where it reads, in any meeting anywhere, AAs share experience, strength, and hope with each other in order to stay sober and help other alcoholics modem to modem or face to face. AAs speak the language of the heart in all its power and simplicity. Talk to us a little bit, Robert, about face to face meetings versus Zoom meetings or phone in meetings or whatever, and how there's value there, but also the difference that you may find different values in different places.
Another great question. And, with the whole COVID opportunity, it created a whole network of online meetings, and that's great. But I believe that proximity is necessary for accountability. So it was really necessary for me and others like me to have a sponsor and have people that I could, because I was very tangible. And virtual reality is virtual reality. It's there, but it's not. So you and I, we will embrace for the first time when we meet next week. And we were already into recovery when we met online. But it's so important to sit across from someone who really understands you, who really gets you. And so nowadays, I can do things virtually, and my recovery is not affected in a negative sense. But you know what, Justin? I still like to go to meetings. I still like to hug. I still like to be hugged. I still like that affirmation that comes from being in the same room. And so if all you can do is attend a meeting online, either you're shut in or there's some other reason that you can't go to a meeting, that's fine. I would prefer meeting someone face to face. Now, my sponsor, Will, who's been my sponsor for 6 years since Jack passed away, I've known him from day one. So even though he lives in Missouri, there's a spiritual connection that he and I have, and we do get together once a year. But if I was a newcomer coming in, I would want to go to a meeting because, again, proximity helps deepen accountability. And if we're not accountable to each other, then I don't think the plan of recovery really reaches its full potential.
No, I agree with that completely, Robert. When I first started in the rooms of recovery, it was all in person. I never did anything online or phone. I thought, well, that's not going to do anything for me. And then COVID happened, and all of a sudden, my fellowship was taken from me. That ability was legally, or whatever we want to call that, taken from us to be able to go and embrace somebody and spend time, hip to hip, knee to knee with somebody, and that accountability. And what happened with me is I finally went, well, I guess I'll go check out one of these Zoom meetings and go check out this fellowship, whatever. I'll check out a couple of different fellowships that I didn't have in-person availability, that I kept saying, I've got everything I need in person. And since, early to mid 2020, my network of people that I just love has magnified greatly. So I want to say yes. The accountability, the intimacy, the love, the physical connection is vital. But I also don't want to discount the Zoom ability to get in contact with me. Robert, I never, ever, ever would have ever known anything about you had it not been for, Zoom type situations.
Yeah.
And I count that as a miracle, and I'm so grateful for that. So my take on this is to people: don't shut yourself out just because you think that in person is the only way that will work, because you never know when you're going to run into a Robert Pardon. You never know when you're going to run into a Whitney. You never know when you're going to run into somebody that is going to change your life, even if they live 1,000 miles away or on the other side of the world. I had a sponsor that lived in Great Britain that changed my life. And I'm so grateful for that.
Yeah.
It never would have happened had it not been for this modem to modem, as it says in the big book. Any other thoughts on that before we move on to the next question?
No, I really think that technology, when used properly and with the proper motives, can really add a dynamic. I mean, again, like you said, we are a perfect example of that. I count you as a dear brother, not only in Christ, but in our recovery journey. And if it was not for social media, you and I we would not meet each other until we got to our eternal resting place.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. All right, so that one of the things that you started off this share with in this question was, God told Adam it's not good for man to be alone, and created Eve out of that, so that there was a fellowship there that happened. Let's go to a question here. Is it okay that my higher power is maybe not that traditional God the biblical God that we read about? Is it okay for the group to be our higher power or a non-traditional God? What is your experience with that, Robert?
Yeah, boy, God, I love these questions because it takes me back to the journey that I signed up for when I first came into recovery and was trying to feel my way through how sick I was and how well other people were. And even in the 12 and 12 in step 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood God, praying only for the knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. In the beginning, it talks about the group being our higher power. And as we grow, things become less tangible out of necessity. So in the beginning, and I've said this before, if I couldn't feel it, taste it, touch it, smell it, experiencing it visually, it wasn't real. I was a very tangible person. So my higher power was the group. And it wasn't until I was 7 years in my recovery journey did I finally, God spoke to me in a way that God speaks to each and every one of us. He came to me in a supernatural way and he said, I am your God. And it catapulted my life. But prior to that, I was in a good marriage. Finally, I hadn't walked out on my kids again. I was employable. There wasn't a sheriff who was looking for me there. All those things. The car company agreed to give me a loan. I mean, all those things that I had lost in my addiction and my untreated alcoholism were given back to me, but I didn't have a higher power. And so it was very tangible. And so I had a friend, his name was Lucky Jim. He said, my name is Jim and I'm a lucky alcoholic. He would say, the tide goes in and the tide goes out and I don't get drunk in between, right? So his higher power was the tide. A person I had introduced you to yesterday, Derek C., that I think should be on your podcast. He's one of my sponsees, and his higher power is Gaius, who is a Greek god who I know absolutely nothing about. But you know what I know about Gaius? She has kept Derek sober for 3 years, and this dude is happy, joyous, and he's free, and he's growing all the time. So don't be discouraged. Whatever your higher power is, if you're happy, joyous, and free, live there.
Yeah, and you quoted the step 11 there, but I think there's a couple of words here that are so important for me in this. I seek through prayer and meditation to improve my conscious contact with God as I understood him. And it's as I understood him. So it's a past tense thing, verbiage, which means God as I understood God yesterday needs to be improved upon, or at least not God. My understanding of God needs to be improved upon. So in a sense, it seems like God is evolving as I move along, when my belief is that my understanding of God evolves as I move along, and it moves to a higher and higher plane as I continue to improve that conscious contact. Any other thoughts on that?
No, God is a constant. God does not move from the left to the right. He said, I'm instant, in season and out of season. I'm the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. It's us who evolve. God always is. God always was. God didn't just come upon our creator. I wish now that you should have all of me. He's always been the creator from the beginning. So it's my evolution, my understanding. And matter of fact, wisdom. It says that wisdom is the principal thing, therefore get wisdom, and with all thy getting, get understanding. So wisdom is the constant, my understanding is what evolves.
That's so powerful. Thank you, Robert. Okay, so here while we're on this topic, let's talk about surrender. what am I going to surrender to? And why do I have to surrender my alcohol, my lust, my food, my gambling, whatever? And if the God of my understanding isn't willing enough, loving enough, strong enough, whatever that may be, courageous enough to accept that surrender, what do I do in that process, and why do I need to surrender those things?
I've been going through the doctor's opinion steps, chapters 1, 2, and 3 again as a refresher, as just a reinforcement of my foundation. And it is my experience that if I don't surrender, surrender means laying down all forms of defense. It was amazing that I would defend my drinking and my carrying on in spite of where my life had been. And so if I don't surrender and if I don't acknowledge how powerless I am once I start going down the road, and as a result of that powerlessness over sexual addiction, gambling, what have you, whether it's behavioral or substance, if I don't recognize my powerlessness once I go down that road, I'll never recognize the unmanageability of my life. And if I don't understand the unmanageability of my life, I will never understand the insanity of defending a position that destroyed my life. If I don't do that, why would I be willing to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as we understood God, right? So surrender is necessary for the steps to take hold. And I don't care if you're involved in a monotheistic religion, if you're involved in yoga, if you're involved as a Buddhist, no matter what you're involved in, if you're LDS, if you're Christian, if you're Catholic, every one of those approaches to a higher power require that we surrender. So it's not just 12-step program. You show me a path to wellness that doesn't require surrender, and I'll rethink my entire position. Surrender is the essential necessary component to my getting well. If I don't surrender, I won't get well. I may get sober. I may stop going to strip clubs or gambling, but eventually I will do it again because I've never surrendered to what has made my life upside down.
Robert, that's so powerful, and yet seems to be so counterintuitive. Yes, all major religious traditions that I'm aware of say, hey, you've got to give up everything in order to get what is there, in order to connect with the higher power, whatever that may be. But why is it almost universally not understood that way? People outside of the rooms, most people, even in the rooms of religion, say, no, it's got to be willpower. I've got to have willpower. I've got to do these things in order to achieve whatever it is that's at the end of the rainbow. And surrender is so counterintuitive. Why is it that way?
Because outside of, and I'll stick with the 12 steps because I don't want to get too controversial in my path of faith. So Bill says in the 12 and 12 steps and 12 traditions, he says, who likes to admit complete defeat? Practically no one. Because when I say I'm wrong, I'm opening myself up to saying what is right. And Winston Churchill, I mean, you can look through historical figures, you can look through 12-step, it's not just my word. Winston Churchill, when he was the Chancellor of Great Britain, he brought them through World War II. In 1952, he says, everyone wants to learn, but no one wants to be taught. Interesting prospect. Everyone wants to learn, but no one wants to be taught. So when I come to you and I say, Justin, I don't know, I'm opening the door to you telling me what you do know. As long as I say, yeah, but it's a bar. It says contempt prior to investigation is a bar against all information and will lead to everlasting ignorance. So the only way for me to learn is to say, I don't know. And denial, it was said last night in the meeting, we suffer from only one of the only diseases known to man that will tell you you don't have it.
Hey, Spearheads, if you're looking to dive deeper into the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous with people who live the solution, then you won't want to miss RICO 12 Big Book Roundtable. Join David G., Nikki M., and me, the moderator Justin B., 3 recovered addicts from multiple fellowships, as we break down the big book line by line. In each 30-minute episode, we share our experience, strength, and hope in a real, raw, and practical roundtable discussion. So, if you are ready to learn and apply what you learn, tune in to RICO 12 Big Book Roundtable on your favorite podcast platform. Yeah, Robert, I mean, we're on the same wavelength there as you were sharing. It's like, I'm going to go back to the spiritual experience appendix there on page 568 and hit on that bar against all information, contempt prior to investigation. But I still want to go there to the previous paragraph, which is right before that quote in that willingness, honesty, and open-mindedness are the essentials of recovery, and they are indispensable. If I say, I got it, I know it, if my favorite line that I said as a teenager and as a young adult was when somebody said, "Hey, Justin, this is something you need to do." I know. What did that do for me? Nothing. You know, if I've closed off my mind, if I'm not willing or honest about things, I've just put up a bar. I've put up a barrier against all new information, and that's going to kill me. Surrender is that. I love how you said it. Surrender is basically the I don't know, and I'm open to learning. Any other thoughts on that, Robert?
Yeah. Bob D., one of our great friends in recovery, he says that the ego's primary function in life is to convince me it doesn't exist. Does that make that is profound? One of my spiritual advisors, who wasn't part of recovery, but he was a spiritual giant in my life, told me that every time I defend myself, it's pride. And when we look at the 12 and 12, when it talks about the 7 deadly sins, Bill says it's not surprising that pride heads the list. So what I do for me is, depending upon how quickly or how hard I push against something, tells me how much I ought to watch it, how much I ought to listen, because why am I pushing against something I don't know? Because it challenges, it comes against my own ego. So I have to, at least, now it doesn't mean it's right, but it does mean I have to examine it to find out what is the reason. Why am I pushing so hard against this concept, this idea, this notion? Is it my bar? Is it my ego saying, get that out of your life? You're going to grow. You're going to learn. You're going to have to surrender. You're going to have to do one of these things to adopt this principle in your life. Or is it there to solidify truth I already believe in? So, but I have to look at it. Otherwise, if I don't look at it, it's always ego. And ego is what got me to the rooms in the beginning.
You know, definitely God is trying to pound something into my head here. My sponsor has recently been really reiterating, Justin, live defenselessly.
Yeah.
Live defenselessly.
Yeah, love that.
My ego doesn't want that. You know, I'm right. I need to stand up. I can't be a doormat. So talk to me a little bit about the difference between living defenselessly and being a doormat in your experience.
Well, Living defensively is a positive position where I stand up for myself to incorporate things that I don't necessarily agree with, but they help me become a better person. Being a doormat means I'm so open-minded that my brain is leaked out. That you can walk over me. I have no defense. I have no doctrinal position. Uh, that is why we stick with the winners. In the beginning, we have to be a doormat in a way because we have to be open to everything because we don't know anything at all. So that is why we need to stick with the winners and to trust the people whose only motive is for us to get well. So in example, if I listen to a speaker and I really, because the trap for an old timer such as me is to think we know it all the time. When the contrary is, the more I learn, the less I know. So I have to be very guarded against that. So when I listen to a person, I might not believe in 100% of what they say. I may only believe in 20% of what they say. But that 20% is what I needed in that moment to fill in the blanks of what's missing in my life. So contempt prior to investigation. And I listen to my college professors who say, pay attention to everything, but don't accept everything. But pay attention to that. Sift it. Find out what is for you. Find out what is consistent with what your teaching is and incorporate that into your life. I have learned so much from Muslims, from rabbis, from priests, from LDS bishops, that on one hand, I would say, well, they're not doctrinally aligned with me, therefore I'm not going to listen to anything they say. But that would be foolish. That would be throwing the baby out with the bathwater when some of that bathwater is actually pretty good. And I can incorporate, even though there are doctrinal differences, that doesn't mean that everything they say is wrong. It just means that their approach to their eternity is different than mine. But that doesn't mean I discount everything they say. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, it makes sense, and that it leads me a little bit to my next question here. So, I have had several sponsors throughout my recovery. I've had my first sponsor was somebody of my own faith. My second sponsor was an Orthodox Jew. My third sponsor was a practicing Muslim. My fourth sponsor was a guy who said he was an atheist communist, and yet to hear him pray the Serenity Prayer was to hear angels singing. And my current sponsor is somebody who is an evangelical Christian. And from each of these people, what happened in this process is God was cracking me open and saying, Justin, you don't know it all. You just because you think that whatever you believe is true does not mean you have all of the truth. Open your mind. And that was a big, as Father Bill W., one of my mentors in recovery, says, it's a big crack in the ego system.
Yeah.
Where my ego is like, oh wait, there's more, really?
Yeah.
And it hurts, but man, it just opens things up. Any other thoughts on that before I jump into this next question about that?
Whether it's a teaching from Gandhi, or whether it's a teaching from a Catholic priest, no matter where the teaching is from, there's an alignment because I start out with truths that are universal. And just because there may be a doctrinal difference between one person and me doesn't mean there isn't a universal truth that I can grow from. And so I'm very careful to not at least bathe in what a person says in their approach to their spiritual way of life, because I can grow from it. And if I don't examine it, I have no opportunity to grow.
Love it. All right. So this next question kind of riffs off of my share of the different sponsors that I've had. How can a sponsor help me? Can't a meeting be my sponsor, or do I always need to have a sponsor? What's your take on that, Robert?
I'm very biased toward that because within my first 2 weeks of recovery back in 1986, I've never known a sober moment without a sponsor. I believe that sponsorship is that intimate relationship that allows me to be honest to others. When I learn how to be honest with Steve or Max or Jack or Will, the 4 sponsors I've had in my journey, it allowed me to be more honest. It was almost like a testing ground. Wow, I can tell this to Jack. If I told this to Jack and he isn't freaked out or doesn't get rid of me, maybe I can share this in a room. Because at the end of the day, Justin, we're only as sick as our secrets. And when something is no longer a secret, it no longer has power over me. And nowadays, I'm an open book. You ask me a question, I'll give you an answer. Providing if it brings you harm, then I'll negotiate that answer. But in most cases, it's not going to. It was just a gateway for me to be honest and accountable to a person that allowed me to be accountable to a room. So it was a very stair step for me. And I believe that sponsorship, although meetings are important, meetings are good, the fellowship is great, there's nothing like sharing the intimacy one man to another.
Hey, Rico 12 Spearheads. If our recovery resources have helped you, please consider a donation. Your financial support, as well as your word of mouth support, keeps Rico 12 running and reaching the man who is still sick. Donate today at rico12.com/support or check the show notes for PayPal and Venmo links. Every contribution helps carry the message. Thanks for being a Rico 12 Spearhead. Yeah, thank you, Robert. And that takes me, that thought takes me back to one of the forewords, and I think it's the forward to the 3rd edition of the big book. Yes. Each day, somewhere in the world, recovery begins when one alcoholic talks with another alcoholic, sharing experience, strength, and hope. The importance of having a sponsor seems to be vital. The importance of that connection, that one-on-one connection, talking with somebody about recovery. That's when talking about somebody experience, strength, and hope in recovery. That's when recovery begins each day, at least according to what that the forward to the 3rd edition says. So let's talk about the next step in that. Stereotypically, so much of sponsorship it can be stereotyped as service. Our step 12 work can be talked about as being a sponsor. Why is it important to be of service to others, to sponsor others after you've walked through the steps with your sponsor?
If I think so much of it is the joy of seeing others get well, seeing others rebuild their life the way you and I and others like us have rebuilt our life. The big book says that this is a joy that you won't want to miss. And it wasn't enough that I was able to get well. Again, I want to see others recover from a treatable condition. I want to see families get restored. I want to see you out of jail with removing your propensity to go back. All the things that occur in recovery, I want the same thing to happen to you that's happened to me and others like me. That's the emotional side of it. The other side of it is I'm mandated. It's called step 12. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics or whatever the addiction is, and to practice these principles in all our affairs. So my serving others is my spiritual and practical response to God doing for me what I could not do for myself. My response to God is to help others, which is very biblical in its approach. Well, I don't want to get into it because I don't want to spiritualize it too much. I don't want to put anyone off, but there's tremendous biblical application to what you and I are talking about. But there is recovery application as well. Matter of fact, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, let's go back to the 12 steps, was written so the first 100 could show us how they got sober. They said, we hope this book is so convincing that no further authentication will be necessary. So the big book of recovery, which is the granddaddy of all SA, OA, EA, NA, GA, you name it, the granddaddy of them all was written for others. You talked about earlier how step 11 is written in the past tense. Every step is written in the past tense, not to tell me what to do, but to tell me what they have done. So from the onset of the program, the installation of the big book was in place to show others. So it's always been about others. And I mentioned this in a meeting the other day. People all the time say, well, as soon as I'm well enough, then I'll share the message. No, you're getting it wrong. There's nothing in the program that is about me other than getting well so I can share with you. When Zig Ziglar, one of the greatest motivational speakers of all time, in his book, See You at the Top, says, if you want to be successful, then go find enough other people and help them be successful, and then you will be successful. I believe my 39-year journey, Justin, of being happy, joyous, and free is because I have time and time again given myself to the service of others. That is why I am strong. It becomes because I want to be an example of him who saved me. Therefore, others are more important than me.
You know, that takes me back to my step work with my first sponsor, Mark G. He was an alcoholic with 26 years sobriety at the time, you know, and that was almost 12 years ago. When we quote unquote finished up the work with step 12, he said, all right, Justin, it is now time for you to sponsor somebody else. And what did I do? I balked at it. I was like, when I get good enough, when I get well enough, I can do this. You know, when I feel better, I can do this. And I said, I'm not ready. And he immediately, without hesitation, I'm sitting in his living room, face to face with him. And he says, congratulations, you just worked an 11-step program. Good luck staying sober. Get out of my house is basically how he did it, you know? And I was like, whoa. He knew exactly the buttons to push with me. I'm a people pleaser. I've got to, hey, Mark just did this. I've got to do whatever it is that I'm going to do for him. And when he says, you got to do this, I was like, okay, I'll do it. And it was the best experience ever to start sponsoring others right away. Imperfectly, I'm a mess. But as I've heard somebody else say, and I'm going to clean it up a little bit because that's not how I talk, but you're not going to mess up another addict any worse than they're already messed up. Just sponsor them, take them through the steps the way that it's directed in the big book, and you're not going to mess them up any worse than they're already messed up. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think understanding the steps, and I often correlate the message of step 9 with the message of step 12. I think a lot of times step 9 is the amends step, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. we have a tendency to think that the person needs to accept our amends for that amends to be complete. No, we made direct amends to them. It doesn't say made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others, and they accept the amends. I want you to think that I'm not that person anymore, but it's not necessary for step 9 to be complete. Just like step 12, we try to carry the message. It doesn't say we try to carry a message that was received, even though we want that message to be received. That's why we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start, not because we need you to get well, but we don't want you to suffer any more than you've already suffered. So we have to remove the imaginary obligation of that message being received. We just have to be willing to give and let God give the increase. Some water, some cultivate, Apollos and Paul, right? And said, God gives the increase. I need to let God do what God does, providing I do what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah, it's beautiful. All right, I think we'll do one or two more questions here, Robert. The next one I do, I think, comes off of this. I mean, I talked about, shared my experience of working the steps the first time through, and my sponsor saying, all right, time to start working it with others, helping them through. Can't I work the steps any way I want? Or is there importance to the way that I work the steps?
You know, I've seen more people relapse by trying to find an easier, softer way. And when we treat the 12 steps like a buffet, we are wrong. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. So each step is a gateway to the preceding step. I would never take a fearless and moral inventory in step 4 if I wasn't surrendered in steps 1, 2, and 3. If I'm not going to take a complete inventory in 4, I'm going to be telling you a partial truth in step 5. I would not be entirely ready, maybe partially ready, to have God remove these defects of character. And I'm not going to be so humble to remove the shortcoming because I don't think they are in step 7, which means I'm going to lie in step 8, which means when you tell me you're sorry, I'll say I'm sorry in step 9, and so on and so forth. Let's look at it from, say, an OSHA standpoint. If I laid a ladder on the wall and I told you that you can't trust rung number 6, would you step on rung number 6? If I told you that rung number 6 gets stronger if you step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, if I told you that step 6 is strengthened when we step on the preceding steps, would you be more confident in step 6? Of course you would. This is why, going back to the question on sponsorship, this is why that sponsorship is so important, because of course we're afraid. It's the first time we're honest in our entire life. We've been hiding an open secret since we started drinking and acting out. We've never wanted anyone to know who we were, and the steps are revealing who we've become. So my relationship with my sponsor tells me that I am okay, that I can share things with him, or if you're female, with her, that I'm okay. I can share these things with you. I'm a big believer in the steps. As an evangelist friend of mine said, you've got to get them lost before you can get them saved. I need to understand the depravity of my condition before I will agree to your path of wellness.
So Robert, once again, this is another God shot where God's saying, "Hey, you just heard this morning before talking to Robert." I was listening to, so Frank Bookman was basically the founder of the Oxford Group, which is where Bill W. came out of, and he said something to the effect of, "It is much easier to help a sick person than a sleeping person in their weaknesses." You know, if somebody is sick and recognizes, "I'm sick, I need help," rather than somebody who is sick but sleeping and doesn't recognize their sickness. So he said it's almost impossible to help the sleeping person. As I share that with you, and as you just shared with me, that thing, it just opened up my eyes that much more to this denial, the ego that you talked about. We suffer from about the only disease that says it is not a disease. And if I'm sleepwalking through it, there's no hope. I may be 10 years sober. I may be checking the boxes, but I'm not awake. I'm not useful. What are your thoughts and feedback to me as I'm just kind of verbal spewing stuff out here, trying to connect dots?
You know, let's look at this from a physical standpoint. I was morbidly obese. And until I realized my food addiction was stronger than me, I never was going to agree to gastric bypass surgery that I had 15 years ago, and I've kept off 170 pounds ever since. Until I agreed that I was powerless over my food addiction, I would have never sought help. When I was going to my orthopedic surgeon and getting cortisone shots, he said to me, we can continue to give you shots for pain, but you have no cartilage left. The next thing for us to do is replace your knees. Until I came into agreement with, I no longer had knees that were functional, they were never going to be replaced. So the thing about addiction, Father Martin says something so profound. Our sexual addiction, our gambling, our alcohol, it puts to sleep. And I love that term that you used, Justin. It puts to sleep that which made us feel uncomfortable, which is to admit our sickness. So when I engage in a unwanted or unnecessary or betrayal, adulteral, sexual relationship with another person, or online, or I go to drink, or it puts me back to sleep, because being awake makes me feel uncomfortable, and being uncomfortable moves me to change. So as long as I'm asleep, I'm staying in denial. When I agree that I'm sick is the only time where I'll go get help.
Man, I'm this has been a very meaningful and eye-opening and dot connecting conversation for me today, Robert. I really appreciate it. Do you have any final words before we wrap this thing up?
No, I want to really thank you for your ministry and your audience. And if anyone out there wants to get in touch with me, just get in touch with Justin at Rico 12. And he's more than willing and able to give you my contact number, my podcast information, and you and I can connect. It's just a privilege to be on with you. And one thing that we do as podcasters is we have the opportunity to help people we'll never meet.
Yeah, that is something that has blown my mind, is the reach that these little podcasts that you and I have that are, they're basically hobby things, but we're passionate about them.
Yeah.
It's something that our little audience that we think we have is magnified beyond. God does for us what we cannot do for ourselves, is where I see that. And it gets to people out there. So if you are someone out there who are like, man, hang on just a second. I'm going to go read a paragraph from the last couple of pages of the first 164. Still, you may say, but I will not have the benefit of contact with you who write this book, who record this podcast. We cannot be sure. God will determine that. So you must remember that your real reliance is always upon Him. He will show you how to create the fellowship you crave. Get out, create a fellowship you crave. Connect with us. You have the opportunity. Send me an email at rico12pod@gmail.com and we can connect you and you can build that fellowship you crave. Robert, thank you so much for this time. I really appreciate it. Everybody keep coming back. It works when I work it. So work it. You are worth it.